When midnight came, Marchand, Novaris, Pierron, and I took up the body and laid it on the other camp bed. We scarcely dared to touch this body. It seemed to us that it possessed some electric virtue. Our trembling hands touched it only with a respect mingled with fear. Oh, power of the imagination! And yet this envelope of the emperor was as cold as marble. As soon as the body had been washed and Novaris had shaved it, we placed it on the first bed, which had previously been made up and placed between the two windows. We covered it with a sheet, leaving the face exposed. When day came, 2 or 3 English officers entered the salon to draw the profile of the emperor's face. Every moment these gentlemen exclaimed admiringly, "What a beautiful head! How majestic the features are!" Their exclamations never ceased. During the morning, the governor came to pay his respect. He was accompanied by the admiral, by his staff, and by the principal officers of the sea and land forces. They remained for a few minutes looking at the emperor and then retired silently, bowing to General Bertrand, Monsieur de Montsalon, Marchand, and the other Frenchmen. Most of the visitors had tears in their eyes as they went away. They were no doubt thinking of the fate of the emperor, who, after being the first man in Europe, had come to die in a lonely rock in the midst of the ocean, and whose body in a few days would be covered with earth. As soon as the governor, the admiral, and their suite had left, a table was set up in the reception room, covered with a sheet, and the emperor's body was laid upon it. It was midday, perhaps, when they proceeded to the autopsy. Monsieur Antomarchi wore the apron and held the scalpel. When the opening had been made, they examined all the parts of the abdomen with care. They observed, among other things, that the liver adhered to the stomach and that this latter had a perforation large enough to pass a finger through. Around this opening there existed many little cavities, which one might have said were made by grains of shot which had been fired from a pistol. When the examination was ended, Monsieur Antomarchi took out the heart and stomach, which he placed in 2 silver vases filled with spirits of wine, and then he sewed up the body again. The doctor, before making the autopsy, had measured the body, had inspected it in its entirety, and had drawn up an official report or description. Monsieur Vignali had filled the office of secretary. The cloth on which the autopsy had been made, being stained with blood in many places, was cut up by those present, and each one had a piece. The English took the largest part of it. Before sewing up the body, Antomarchi, taking advantage of a moment when the eyes of the English were not fixed on the body, had taken 2 little pieces from a rib which he had given to Monsieur Vignali and Corso. When the sewing up was finished, we dressed the emperor as he had been in his campaigns, that is to say, in the uniform of the chasseurs de cheval of the Imperial Guard. He had on his boots and spurs, with his hat on his head and his sword by his side. No piece of the costume was forgotten. Fearing that the governor might wish to take possession of the emperor's sword, the grand marshal's was substituted for it. The bedroom, which Monsieur de Montsalon had hung with black, was transformed into a mortuary chapel. The altar was erected against the partition of the dining room, one of the 2 camp beds, with the curtain raised, and attached to the 4 walls at the tops of the bedposts formed the sarcophagus. The head of the bed was placed at the foot of the altar, and the chandelier from the salon was hung in the middle of the room. The emperor's body was brought from the parlor and placed on the bed, which had been covered with the cloak of Marengo. The head rested on a pillow. On the breast was a silver crucifix. The heart and stomach and vases were placed on the front part, the heart in a silver casserole, and the stomach in a round cup for a sponge out of the emperor's dressing case. From the manner in which the bed was placed, the emperor had his head towards the east, and consequently his feet towards the west. The girandoles, the candelabra, and the chandelier were filled with lighted candles and remained so all the time. The emperor's body lay in state. When everything was ready, in order that the Abbé Vignali said mass, which all the French attended, attention must be called to the fact that Dr. Arnaud, or his substitute, always remained present. They had received orders from the governor to watch the body, and especially the heart and the stomach, which had been removed from it. His Excellency, probably fearing that they might disappear, or be taken away by means of some substitution. As the governor had given permission to all the troops of the island, military or naval, to come to Longwood in the afternoon by a spontaneous movement, they all, officers, non-commissioned officers, and privates, hastened there. They arrived at the house of death, some of them in uniform and some in working clothes, covered with sweat. In spite of the considerable number of visitors, everything passed off in the most orderly way. They came in through the valet's antechamber and the bathroom, the study, and the bedroom, or mortuary chapel, where they remained for a few minutes, after which they went out by the dining room, the salon, and the reception room. During the passage of the visitors, the Grand Marshal was at the head of the bed, Monsieur de Montslon and Marchand at the foot, and the servants ranged on the opposite side near the windows. As soon as permission to come to Longwood had been given, all work stopped, for everyone wished to see the great man, the great Napoleon. It was thus that the English soldiers called the Emperor. The apartments were not emptied so long as it was light. We remarked that most of the officers and soldiers, after looking at the corpse of the hero, seemed deeply moved by the spectacle which they had before their eyes. We also noticed that a number knelt down, and after having made the sign of the cross over the emperor's forehead with the thumb of their right hand, they were probably Irish. Among the non-commissioned officers was one who came close to the bed, holding a child by the hand, and saying, as he showed this child the emperor's body, "Come, come and see the great man, the great Napoleon." This old soldier pronounced these words with so much heart and so much warmth that all those present felt the lively emotion which he felt himself. At nightfall, as the crowd had melted away, no one was left at Longwood but those who lived there. 2 or 3 servants had the sweet but sad satisfaction of watching beside the emperor's body. The next day, Abbe Vignali said mass again, at which several Catholics of both sexes were present. From the camp, after divine service, the inhabitants of the island arrived, masters and slaves, men and women and children. They hurried alongward from all sides. There was the same crowd as the day before. In a few hours, the emperor would be hidden from all eyes, as Madame Bertrand had the idea that it would be proper to have a cast made of the emperor's face. An English doctor, Mr. Burton, had gone during the morning in search of some calcareous stone from which plaster could be made. The doctor, having found what he wanted with some difficulty, came back to Longwood with a little poor plaster which he had obtained by burning. As soon as the public had gone, he and Edsomarchi set to work in order to facilitate the operation. They freed the emperor's neck by taking off his collar and cravat. Furthermore, they cut off the hair which still grew on the brow and the temples. It must be said that the rest of the hair had been cut off at the autopsy to be used in making bracelets which were to be sent to different members of the family, and in accordance with the order which the emperor had given. In spite of the poor quality of the plaster, Edsomarchi and Burton succeeded very happily in making a cast, first of the face and then of the rest of the head. It is very unfortunate that they did not think of taking a cast of the hands, for they were certainly beautiful enough to be preserved.